The midterm primary calendar marches on with key contests tomorrow in Hawaii, and next week voters head to the polls in Connecticut, Minnesota, Vermont, and Wisconsin. Meantime, in Kansas, the race for governor remains too close to call, with Republican challenger Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State, now recusing himself from the vote count. Let's bring in our political panel: Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, and Jen Kerns, GOP strategist and former spokeswoman for the California Republican Party. Let's start with the Kansas GOP gubernatorial primary. I just mentioned it right now. We could get even a recount after the extended counting process. Does this give a leg up to the Democrats, Jen, if, for example, other candidates, Democratic candidates, independent candidates, can actually use that time to go out and campaign?
They could, and I think what this really shows us is exactly how close these races are in these 2018 midterm elections. In the case of Chris Kobach, I think the important lesson here is shows the power of the endorsement of President Donald Trump. My understanding is that the Kobach campaign didn't ask for that until the 11th hour when President Trump tweeted out his support. It actually helped Kobach in this case. So I think what the White House and the GOP is figuring out is, where does Donald Trump's endorsement help and where does it hurt? I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for the GOP in November.
Basil, after looking at all of the elections this week, what's your takeaway for the Democratic strategy? Is it as close as Jen says?
Well, the strategy is first and foremost to contend in every seat in every district. That's something that the party has sometimes not done. But I think what the lessons from this week is that we can contest and we can be strong in districts where we may have thought we otherwise would not have been. And we actually force the Republicans to spend money in these districts where they would not have before. Exactly like Ohio. So that's the test. And I think it's also a referendum, quite frankly, on the president. If we can keep him from campaigning in certain areas or push him to do it in others where we can actually bring back some voters like suburban voters and so on.
The big difference here, though, Basil, is the GOP can afford to spend money. Unlike the DNC, we have to borrow $2 million to keep the lights on.
Actually.
Right.
Well, guys, I'm down here in D.C. and I'm like, geeking out over this list of primaries that are coming up next week. And I'm really interested to see what happens in Wisconsin in the GOP Senate primary with, and this is a question for Jen, with State Senator Leah Vukmir and, of course, the first-time candidate Kevin Nicholson, because this tape has emerged of the state senator completely bashing then candidate Donald Trump. And so I'm reading this, correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, as a test of whether or not, the anti-Trumpers and the never-Trumpers versus the diehard Trumpers. What do you think?
Well, look, there's no doubt there's still a never-Trump coalition out there, and there is room for disagreement and debate within the Republican Party. But I don't think the GOP is having the identity crisis and the civil war as much as the Democrats are these days. If you look at the socialist candidate, if you look at Maxine Waters' statements here, you've got a lot of problems on the Democrat side. And look at the Hawaii race coming up. Look no further than Tulsi Gabbard. This is a person who stood up for Bernie Sanders against the Hillary Clinton machine, the Hillary Clinton establishment candidate, and has continued to be punished, including recently when the Hawaii Teachers Association revoked their endorsement from her. So you've got a lot of problems internally in the Democratic Party that I think are going to show.
I hear you on that, Jen, but let me press you a little bit because with regards to the Senate primary Republican in Wisconsin, seriously, because folks are going to make a lot out of this. What can we read from this primary in Wisconsin on next week?
Well, look, it's been a while since a presidential candidate has won in Wisconsin. You've got Speaker Paul Ryan retiring. I think this is a toss-up, but I would agree with even some of the left-wing analysts out there saying that Republicans are going to keep that Paul Ryan seat. I think it'll be a safe bet.
And for Basil, just you mentioned the independent voters, women voters, huge suburban voters in terms of how this is going to play for next week. We've seen Ivanka Trump hit the campaign trail. I think you would argue these are the key constituency for the next cycle as well as for the midterms is going to be these college-educated women suburbanites, no?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely correct. And one of the things we also have to point out is that the suburbs are actually becoming far more diverse, and that's true nationally. So you have what I call sort of a political osmosis, that you have a lot of suburban voters that care deeply about taxation and governance, but they're also starting to voice their concerns and opinions about social justice issues. And despite Ivanka Trump actually being able to go out and campaign on behalf of the president and Republicans, I do think that the ways in which this president has engaged women, in particular over the last few years, is going to resonate with many of these voters.
Basil, touching on Jen's point earlier, a civil war brewing within the Democratic Party. Ocasio-Cortez in Honolulu this week, although her endorsements really haven't played out this week, is that a good thing for the Democratic Party come November?
I do not think there is a civil war in our party. We are, as someone wrote the other day, we are actually mature enough to handle our differences within the party and handle our debates. We're a party of social economic justice, as I say, and I like the fact that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is campaigning and raising money for candidates. We can disagree, but she's actually helping us gain attention for our candidates.
I think both parties would say the other parties in the civil war. I think it works out. That's the answer
well, their
right
speaker's
now.
retiring. Our minority leader's staying put.
Basil, Jen, thank you so much, but do stick around. We'll be back with Basil Smikle and Jen Kerns to discuss more. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets Balance of Power. I'm Kevin Cirilli.
And I'm Sherry Yan. Let's now drill down on some of the issues driving some of the key primary contests nationwide. We're back with our political panel, Basil Smikle and Jen Kerns. Jen, let me start with you because next week the Senate comes back. We're getting cloture votes on judicial nominations. How galvanizing a force will the appointment of judges, changes in the Supreme Court be for the Republicans?
I think it will be significant. If you look at the Republican base, they rallied around Judge Gorsuch. The Supreme Court and the future of it is highly important to the Republican base, as I'm sure it is to the Democrat base. But I think the midterms may have already been won and lost in terms of the messaging. Democrats went out there pretty early this year and said there was going to be a big blue wave. That hasn't happened. So I think the Democrats have already lost the midterms, regardless of what happens in November.
Basil, the management of expectations.
No, that's actually very important to me because even if we do make substantial gains, if they're not sort of at the expectations that we've set, then the perception is that we will have lost. But I do think that we have some really good messaging, and the truth is that Republicans could have it, but they've sort of been kept from talking about the GDP and the growth of the economy. They haven't been able to go out there and talk about tax cuts in the way they thought they would have been able to. So it still presents an opening for us to provide alternatives to that, and we're doing that district by district.
Well, look, Republicans don't have to talk about it when the actions speak louder. You look at the record stock market, record jobs market, record low unemployment for African Americans, record low unemployment for women. We don't have to talk about it. We're out there doing it. I think the American people feel it. I think that's what they'll be voting on in November.
I was struck to see these headlines that Michael Avenatti is going to be in Iowa. I mean, now there's a rumor that he's running for president in 2020. I mean, hey, stranger things have happened. I am very eager to get back on the presidential campaign trail. But let me ask you this, Basil, for you. I mean, do you think this issue of impeachment, Russia, should that be the driving message coming from Democrats in the midterms, or should they play up other economic issues or differences?
Yeah, I'm of the belief that we should be playing up the economic issues because I actually think,
really,
because I think that Russia is actually built into the vote right now. There's no reason for us to keep hearing it. And one of the lessons I learned very early on in politics is if you see a boulder rolling down the hill, don't get in its way. So we don't need to continue to push Russia. The truth is that with respect to impeachment, I think the average voter isn't really thinking about that. They don't like what they see, but we have to still provide the alternative. We can't put all of our hopes on getting a Democratic Congress just so that we can impeach the president. It has to be more than that.
And Jen, I think you would agree with that. Look at me. I found common ground between you two.
Well, that's why it was a great question, Kevin. And this is why Basil is very smart. His views match a Quinnipiac poll out just about a month ago, which showed that the popularity of the special counsel is down about 12 points. You have that at the same time that the president's popularity is up about 5 points. That's a 17-point gap. And that's why you see Democrats saying, you know what? better not talk about the special counsel as much. Even Robert Mueller, who's legendarily respected, his own personal public opinion polling is down also. It's hard to believe we poll the popularity of the special counsel, but that is the America we're living in today, I guess. But I think the Democrats are wise to focus on the economic issues.
Jen, thank you so much. Basil as well. Jen Kerns, Republican strategist, and Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist. Thank you both for this discussion today.